Originally, we were going to be speaking about the UAE and Thailand, but unfortunately, Kelly Gass cannot make it tonight, this afternoon. I'm already anticipating it's night. So we're going to focus only on Thailand. I'd like to welcome back Daniel Cheng. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was a very, very, very interesting talk about Japan. It's interesting to see possibilities or the lack thereof. Obviously, Thailand is one of the main points, the exciting points, which Asian gaming can be looking at now. There's been a lot of speculation about it. I'd like to ask a bit, how close are we to moving past speculation towards something that we can actually set a timeline to?
So I don't want this to be a session of all conjectures, because there is a lot of conjecture going on, but rather look at the progress thus far, and then the audience and all of us can sort of make our own conclusions on where we think it will eventually go. So if you go back to something like over 15 years ago, if some of you can remember, the idea of a casino in Thailand is not new. It was brought up then by the Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra, about the same time actually when Japan came up with the idea of a casino back in 1999, and then Singapore followed with proposing casino legislation sometime in 2004. And Thailand was talking about that at the same time. But that eventually did not happen, as we all know, because the Prime Minister was sent into exile, and then his daughter was sent into exile, and then we have all that. And then fast forward to 2021, we now have, why I'm saying things are different now from before, when, for 15 years, everybody said, it's nice to have an IR, a casino in Thailand, but it's a pipe dream, right? It's wonderful. As far as the investor is concerned, we're all willing to put in billions of dollars into Thailand. There's no greater market. You have 40 million tourists in Macau at the peak before COVID set in. You also have 40 million tourists in Thailand.
Which is a little bit bigger.
A little bit bigger, yeah, slightly. But we're in Macau, you have 90-odd% of the tourists that just comes across the border, which Vitaly said is, technically a domestic market. But the payload of tourists into Thailand are largely international, right? And as it is, Thailand is already a great tourism destination, right? So they have already a lot of the software and hardware that we want to have in an integrated resort that Macau has to try and develop, whether artificially or from scratch. So it's perfect for us. We don't even need to crunch the numbers to know it's going to work. But the problem before was when Prime Minister Thaksin brought up the matter of having a casino, he did not get the approval from the royal palace. And in Thailand, as you know, it's a monarchy and everybody respects the king. Nothing's going to move. Even all the laws in the Thai legislature have to be finally approved by a royal decree before it can become law. So in the absence of that, it wasn't going to really happen. But this time round, when the current sitting Prime Minister Prayut, was asked in the media about having an integrated resort like Singapore, he gave a sort of a little candid response that he wasn't opposed to it. And we got very excited because this was the orchestrator of the coup. He is a royalist prime minister. So we know that whatever he says, probably needs to get some sort of nod from the king. And of course, we have a very different king now, right? And for the first time, 2 years ago, it was actually tabled in the Thai legislature. Now, that has never happened before.
So these are positive. There's various different moving pieces which come into it. But then they're speaking about the Prime Minister himself. Also, he's, dissolved Parliament ahead of the May elections, but he had also previously pledged to eliminate online gambling and corruption. How does that kind of go in line or opposed to this view on legalizing casinos?
Well, when he talked about eradicating online gambling, he was referring to unregulated online gambling. The government is actually not opposed to regulated online gaming. If any of you had browsed through the recent report that came out of the Entertainment Complex Extraordinary Committee, that's like a 202-page document. The forms of gambling in the model that was outlined in the paper actually included online gambling. Yeah.
Which is a big shift. I mean, and not only did it include online gambling, but it also opened the door for locals gambling. They didn't only focus it on foreigners.
Yes, and the whole gamut of gambling that the audience here will be very excited. They are open to considering sports betting, esports, lottery, all of it. What it finally will be is still a little bit further down the road, but they are pretty open-minded about it at this point in time.
But I mean, we also saw, as we were just talking about Japan before, we saw that there was high hopes for Japan, and then it slowly got whittled away and whittled away. Would you expect that we're going to see something similar to Thailand, especially considering that it was so hard hit during the pandemic because it's so heavily reliant on tourism? And then now tourism is roaring back. So they are getting those revenues back. They did legalize cannabis, which is already bringing them in additional tax revenue. Are they still needing to pursue the casino avenue?
Thailand differs from Japan in that tourism is not a big part of the overall Japanese gross domestic product. So even if they have integrated resort that generate 20, 30, 40 billion dollars of turnover, it's not big as a percentage of the national economy. However, in Thailand, tourism is a very big component of their GDP. So they're not content to let it remain the status quo. They are always looking at ways to grow it, especially in the context when countries like Macau deregulated its gaming industry, Singapore introduced integrated resorts. Those are all seen as threats to Thailand's tourism, right? So it's natural that they table it into consideration.
It's interesting that you mentioned those because I was going to question where Thailand might be looking to as a shining example of the legislation that they should be putting into place for regulating casinos. Can you point out one jurisdiction in particular, or do you think they're going to be pulling from various jurisdictions?
So as part of the most recent analysis by the Extraordinary Committee, they essentially studied three particular jurisdictions, Macau, Singapore, and Malaysia. But ultimately, the final conclusion in the study was that the committee recommended that it is more modeled towards Singapore, not completely, but some of the elements, which is what Japan said they would do as well, although it didn't really turn out that way in the final piece of their legislation. But that's where the Thais are at as well.
That's interesting because, I mean, Macau, we've got 6 concessions, Singapore 2, Malaysia, it's a monopoly. So would you expect that by modeling it on the Singapore model, that's going to mean a limitation on the overall number of licenses?
No, not that. Modeling not in terms of having duopoly or anything like that. I mean, obviously, Thailand is a much bigger country. It's a population of 70 million people, middle class 25 million. That's like 5 times of Singapore already. So for all intents and purposes, if you do the multiple against Singapore IRs, they could have 10 integrated resorts. The committee did not put a number on how many resorts there will be. They are leaving it more for the more detailed study process, but certainly the talk was initially there could be up to 5. Although that's not written in stone, they are more looking at the numbers in association with the locations they think are suitable to have integrated resorts, and the interest from, of course, the industry as well. And as I said, the industry is all ready and waiting.
Yeah, I was going to say, based upon what we've seen so far here, there's absolutely no interest in Thailand. We do have, actually, you mapped out the 22, right? Jurisdictions that they've outlined so far, some which are more commonly known, such as Bangkok, Phuket, and Chiang Mai, already major tourist jurisdictions. But there is a map that we can look at here that shows some of the other ones. I wanted to ask you, where, aside from Bangkok being very centrally located, already having lots of infrastructure, Phuket already a major tourist hub, Chiang Mai same thing. What are some of the other areas which could be successful?
Right, so I refer back to one of the sessions yesterday when, someone mentioned that as far as the industry is concerned, when we look at the microcosm of the people in this room, then we'll just say, why don't the government just put it in Bangkok, right? Which is where everybody wants it. But of course, as a casino business and a governmental organization, we have different objectives and goals. And for Thailand, they have to also look at economic and wealth distribution. So it's always about also gentrification, and economic rejuvenation of the regional areas. And they have to balance all that. So essentially, the study have identified 3 zones where they recommend integrated resorts could be built. The first zone is in the precinct of Greater Bangkok, and what is known as the Eastern Economic Corridor, which is basically the area in the Chonburi province, which is where Pattaya is. And then the second zone is where are the 22 provinces that have a tourism industry in areas which are within 100 kilometers radius of an airport, right? And then the third zone is another 22 provinces, not the same 22, which have borders with neighboring countries, where they have border checkpoints in the vicinity. So those were the 3 general zones that the committee has proposed initially.
Regarding the scale, I mean, these zones are very interesting, and they could also lead to, we know that there's a propensity for Thai gamblers to cross the border to locations where they can legally gamble. Do you think that by locating these casinos within Thailand, that would then eliminate a lot of the revenue streams for those other bordering casinos?
Certainly, because that was one of the main objective of the proposition for the legislation. What happened 2 years ago was in the Thai parliament, there were up to 11 motions tabled by lawmakers in the parliament to propose for the cabinet to consider integrated resorts. And one of the reasons was the outflow of funds in all the border casinos around Thailand. And the other was, of course, to generate fiscal revenue and jobs and all the usual things that an integrated resort brings to a local economy.
I mean, according to some estimates, up to half of Thailand's adults do gamble illegally. And there are notoriously underground casinos which already exist. What type of opposition do you think will be seen from that faction that's operating in the black market towards actually having, losing money by having casinos be legalized?
So, funny story. So, strangely, one of the lawmakers who was also a member of the casino committee is supposedly the biggest owner of the underground casinos. But he is a lawmaker. and he seems to be for it. But I think the belief that even with integrated resorts in Thailand, some form of the underground casinos will still continue to thrive and operate, if not for just the more working class, citizens, right?
Do you think that's why also in part they're aiming to have such broad, they're aiming to open it up so broadly so that they would be including land-based casinos, online gaming, sports betting, by making everything legal? Is that their attempt to completely wipe out the underground market?
I wouldn't say they plan to make everything legal. They are being open-minded about it. So that first 202-page report is very general. They did not go into any very specific recommendations.
So light reading of 202 pages.
Yeah, it's pretty light reading, but let me give you an idea of what the process is like, right? So they had that 10, 11 motions 2 years ago that set this extraordinary committee into motion. That was in December 2021, right? And that committee was convened with a total of 60 persons, 60 lawmakers. So that's a very, very big committee. Of that 60, 15 are cabinet members. They are cabinet ministers. So it's very high power. But the very positive thing for us in the industry in this committee was that they were made up of politicians from all the different political parties on both sides of the aisle, which means that you're not going to have the political issues that Japan is having, right? And on top of the fact that we think the Royal Palace is not going to be opposed with it. So it all looks very good. And then on top of these 60 committee members, you have almost 120 advisors to the committee, which includes, again, more politicians, senators, academia, NGOs, major corporations that are associated with tourism. So it looks very serious, the intent, by just the sheer amount of people involved in this. The study was supposed to take 90 days. It was extended another 90 days. It was extended a further 60 days. So it became a 240-day studies over about a year and a half period. And around that, there were 24 committee meetings. And there were 4 subcommittees in the committee, which have a dozen other meetings. So you can see that the progression was very quick. And up till 2 months ago, that full report was presented in the House legislature, and it was passed. Passed meaning...
With overwhelming support.
Yes, overwhelming support. So not law yet, but it means that now it's going to the next step, where then another extraordinary committee will have to be convened, but this time they are going to study the legislation, because Thailand currently have a Gambling Act which was enacted in 1935, and that currently, does not have a casino gambling element in it. Well, it actually does. It has a small section which says, in 1939, where they allow for a casino in the province of Hua Hin, and the casino actually opened for 3 months before it was shut down because it was not managed and controlled properly. But now they have to relook at the legislation again to introduce all these recommendations that were proposed in the first study.
What do you think about the overall feeling by Thai people in general? I mean, that's one of the major things that could derail Japan as a referendum. But if it did come down to a referendum, is there support by the Thai community? Yeah,
so that's a red flag like we had in Japan that stopped a lot of things. Japan is a largely Shinto Buddhism society. Thailand is a largely Buddhist society. outwardly, both countries are very liberal, but when it comes to issue like this, we've seen how in Japan that it got derailed. So the government is very cognizant of that because they saw what happened in Japan. And so the recommendations of the panel was that, a big part of the process going forward would have to gauge how the population feels about it. Whether that means they will put it to a referendum, it's too early days to say that, but certainly they are very concerned about that respect.
Well, and what about the size that they'd be looking for? I mean, by having such diverse areas that they've chosen, which are very, very different, a casino resort that's in Bangkok, in the heart of Bangkok, would be very different from one that's in Phuket, for example. Do you think that we'd be looking at various different types of integrated resorts and smaller casinos being established in different places in Thailand?
Yeah. So at least the Thai government is realistic enough to understand that, because they are also open to having these developments in the more regional areas, and they know that, depending on the location, then that commensurate with, a certain amount of investment, as you said. So they actually came up with now a very crude starting model to say we will have a small, medium, and large, category of integrated resort. So the large integrated resort, which will be more closer to the metropolitan area or large tourism areas, would, right now they are proposing, have to come with a minimum investment of $3 billion. And then for the medium size properties, then the investment range would be between $300 million to $600 million. And then the small ones would be a minimum investment of $30 million. So that's the starting point of what they're looking at right now, depending on which locations they go with down the road.
Speaking of developing different regions, do you think that would also mean, because of the problems which are associated with casinos opening in certain countries, problem gambling, etc., crime, do you think that there would be different rules applied to the smaller sized casinos, for example, limiting them to foreigners only, or to try and mitigate those potential challenges?
No, I don't think there will be differentiation. There's not been any discussion regarding that. I think it will be a universal rule. In following with the Singapore model, they will set similar restriction for locals like Singapore. So there will be an entry fee for locals, and on top of that, they will actually impose some form of income check. So as of right now, they're saying that a Thai citizen have to prove that he earned at least $15,000 a year before he can be admitted in the casino, and maybe at least 20 years old.
I noticed that you do have one more slide as well. Would you mind walking us through what that is comprising? Could we put that up on the screen, please? The first one we have here. So what are we looking at when that shows up? Could you just explain what it's the document, right? The first slide that you have?
Oh.
Which is coming, I think. So what are we going to be looking at in a second?
That's actually just the cover page of the 202, general extraordinary committee report, right? So for us operators, those who have read it, we are very enthused because of, I mean, it's crude, but there's a fair level of detail, and given that, they still are learning about what the industry is, it's a very, very credible effort that encourages us that we believe this is going to happen. The other reason, as you mentioned, there's not been much progress after that in the last few months, but that's because Thailand, as you said, 2 days ago, dissolved the government and called for an election, which everybody knew was going to happen. And now the election is set for, I think, May the 14th. But as far as we're concerned, we're not concerned because we find that there's cross-partisan support anyway for IRs, which means we don't really care which is the new ruling party and who's the prime minister, because we feel that it's still going to go forward. But obviously they want to delay and see, who's now in power before they take the thing moving again.
I'm sure that our audience has quite a few questions as well about Thailand being the next big thing within Asia. Would anybody like to ask a question? Don't be shy. This is our last panel today, please. Thank you.
Hi, this is Tony from APE. So I recently moved down to Thailand, and it's been a wonderful...
Lucky you.
Indeed. It's a wonderful place to live. It's a lovely place to visit as a tourist. The whole place is booming with Western tourists, and now, since the beginning of this week, Chinese tourists. And my impression of this gaming legislation is that it's moved very fast. And as Daniel correctly mentioned, it's all sides are for it. So it's going to move very fast. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for gaming industry, people in this room, and operators to look at it, because it's a wonderful country. No further comments on that. I think it's going to be a hot topic next year.
I think he needs to grab a seat up here next time. Yes, please, Mohammed.
Hi, I'm Mohammed Cohen from iGaming Business. I just want to ask, what's the Thailand government looking for in IRs? Are they looking for tax revenue? Are they looking for jobs? Or are they looking to keep their place in the tourism hierarchy to stay on top? Or, what's the incentive for them? If you're an operator, what is it you want to try to sell them?
So for the government, all of the above that you said, right? Keep themselves at, and continue to be the leader in tourism in the region. But the other, as we talked about just now, was to, as a stopgap measure against, the dozens of casinos, the small casinos that have been built around the borders of Thailand that is, siphoning all the income out of the country. And then the third is to arrest against mitigate the underground casinos that are flourishing. And the fourth is actually as a security and social measure, where if they regulate casino gambling, then at least there is some way that they can control it, as opposed to the fact now that everything's illegal. And of course, jobs, yeah.
Do we have any more questions from the floor?
Just one more point, that economic rejuvenation is a very big thing also for the Thai government, which means we will most certainly see a number of resorts that are outside the main city centers. Yeah.
Any more questions from the floor? Well, if we don't have any more questions, yes? Do I see a hand? No? All right, well, a very, very exciting topic, and I know it's the multi-billion-dollar question. We're looking to see how that's going to play out. Thank you very much for providing your insights here. Mr. Daniel Cheng, Senior Gaming Executive, thank you.
Thank you.